Hey everybody, welcome to UX Chats, where we sit down with senior designers to solve real challenges that designers face every day. My name is Jordan Bowman, and I'm here with Taylor Palmer, and we're the creators of UX Tools.
Hi everybody.
Today our guest is Lindsey Martin. Lindsey, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So Lindsey, can you tell us a bit about yourself?
Yes. I am a designer. I started my UX career as a researcher and then transitioned into design. I think that was where my heart was the whole time. I have a bull terrier named Zelda, and anyone that knows me knows Zelda. She is my right-hand man. I have a couple of kids who are cute. Yeah, it's a little bit about me. I live in Salt Lake City.
Yeah, we're really excited to have you today, Lindsey. I think you're kind of the expert on the subject matter that we're going to talk about, so really excited to have you.
Yeah, Lindsey, it's great to have you today. We're excited to chat more. A modest introduction, by the way. Lindsey is also director of a UX team, a team that I used to be on, and so it's really excited to have her here with us. So today, Lindsey, what we want to chat about, let's say that I'm a designer on a fast-moving team that's trying to keep up with a fast-paced company. How can I shorten the time it takes for me to synthesize my research and make sure that I'm still doing good synthesis, but not miss my deadlines and still keep moving quickly? Lindsey, why don't you start us off?
Yeah, that is a good question. And I think it's a hard question, but one that I have asked myself, you have asked yourself, we've all asked ourselves. Jordan has certainly asked himself. And my perspective on that is I think it's helpful when thinking about how to speed up synthesis to talk about what synthesis actually is or what it actually means. Because if a word could be self-important, I think synthesis is a very self-important word. It sounds really fancy and frankly intimidating, and but all it really means is making sense out of what you see and what you hear, and making a logical inference from a lot of inputs and different pieces of data. And a metaphor that I like to use that I think helps explain it maybe in a way that most people can relate to is like a reading comprehension exam. So if you remember in grade school doing like proficiency testing, and it would be like, read this paragraph, and now here are a series of questions that will determine if you're able to use context clues and make a logical assumption about something that could happen next based on what you've read. And I think that's like a good proxy for what we're talking about when we're talking about synthesis. So.
Yeah, I appreciate the bringing us back to basics. UX is full of jargon and buzzwords, and sometimes it helps us to like trace the etymology of some of these phrases and understand what are we actually doing in that activity. And I think you're right. Sense making is a word that we used to use a lot on our team, and so really as you're doing your research using whatever method that may be, I think you're trying to track along the way and kind of pull these insights out and put them into a greater whole, like merge them into some theme that's coming out of that, right? Some larger concept that you can say, we've seen this pattern enough to believe that this hypothesis is true, right? That we can stake a bet on this and that the company should move or the product should move in this direction. So as I think about a way someone could do that more quickly, I think, as I just mentioned, I think doing it along the way is an important part of that. If you wait to try and synthesize everything that you've learned in the past 3 weeks, you're going to have a tough time recalling those first sessions at all, and kind of the details and minutia of those sessions. And also it's going to be a huge data set to try and synthesize. And so I think finding ways to chunk that down can be really helpful to staying nimble in synthesis and also keeping things at the front of your mind. And curious to hear from either of you how that has worked for you before.
Yeah, I think it is pretty intimidating to come up against, this huge batch of research and data you've gathered and have to synthesize through all of it and analyze all of it. So it is really nice to chunk it down and break it into pieces and do it along the way. I think there are lots of benefits to that actually too. For example, sometimes you get to the end of a project and you're like sitting there analyzing the data and stuff and trying to discover these themes and insights and stuff. And you discover something in particular that's really seems really important. And you wish you had known about it before, because then you could dig into it a little bit more. And at this point, at the end of the project, it's already, the research is already done. I mean, you could go back and try to do it more, but try to do more methods and research and stuff. But I think it's really valuable to synthesize along the way, because then you can pull out themes and important concepts and stuff, and then kind of course correct and dig into those ideas a little bit more in the research that you have left and discover things along the way, so that you can go after, these really big, important questions.
Yeah, but also to your point of uncovering something, like toward the end that might have been helpful to know before, or maybe changes the way that you're thinking about something, like maybe kind of too close to your time of delivery, or like the end of the arc of a project. I think it's also helpful with synthesis to go into it with a goal in mind and keep that goal like very front and center. And sometimes that goal is like also indicating the scope, right? Like with synthesis, you want essentially to undergo a change, right? Like you want like the post synthesis to tell you something that you didn't know before, or to like the goal. Okay, so the goal of synthesis is to make progress, right? And like, so that progress might look like a change, a small or a large change to the design. Like it might be something that has to do with usability. Like I went and I looked at 7 people use this, or 8 people, or 12 people, or however many people you're talking with. And I saw a pattern in the way that they engaged with this. So like clearly there's a change that I need to make with my design. It might look like a reprioritization of value chunks. So it might say like, hey, this is how we thought we were going to approach the project, but I've talked to 2 or 3 people and I'm starting to see a pattern, and maybe like the things that we thought people valued are not the things that they valued. Or it might look like a new hypothesis, which is like, hey, we went into this with one hypothesis. After having some engagement with customers, we are arriving at a different hypothesis. And like all of that is successful synthesis. So I don't know if this is getting away from like making your project move faster, but you are making progress, and like that's important and that is valuable.
Yeah, because the successful outcome of synthesis is like clarity and direction, not like shipping code or like delivering a project or something, right? So I think we can break apart those definitions, and maybe it'll be helpful for designers to think about what you just said, right? The progress as being furthering your understanding of the problem. And I really like that idea of it's almost like the best way to speed up synthesis is to get a high level of clarity and alignment before research begins. Like, do we know what we're looking for? Do we clearly understand the problem? Are we solving the right problem? And if you know what you're looking for, then in your calls or tests or whatever, it's a lot easier to get out your metaphorical highlighter and say, there it is, found it again, heard it again, right? And start tracing these patterns. If you're unsure what you're looking for, and there is a place for that kind of strategic discovery research, but if you're unsure what you're looking for, it's going to be really hard to pick it out as you go. And you're going to need a lot more energy towards the end of the project to pull all that out. And probably you're going to have to spend a lot more time trying to synthesize. So I think that's very true. You can speed yourself up by front loading a lot of that effort.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And if we're talking, in the spirit of this podcast, which is like, how do I, as a designer who is maybe the only one on my team, or maybe I have a small team, or maybe I'm even on a large team, but I'm the sole designer on my particular product or problem area. Like, how do I go and speed up my own cycle? I think we're probably limiting this discussion to some of those more tactical answers, right? Like, how do I validate like this design decision, or like, have I correctly defined the model by which someone understands this feature? We're probably leaving out like these very large scale, more open-ended research initiatives where it's like, go and identify adjacent use cases so that we can expand our market. Like, that's probably not what we're talking about here. And I think that those cycles are necessarily longer. But yeah, when it comes to me making progress, I'm really just looking at like, okay, I went and I talked to Taylor and I talked to Jordan, and they both had a perspective on this. And so how can I take what I heard from them and then combining it with like what I know to be true about people generally, what I know to be true about the way that people engage with digital products, what's kind of the next leap I can make that impacts the way I think about my customers, that impacts the way I think about the product, that impacts the way I think about design. And that's like a really narrow scope, right? Like that's really achievable. Anybody can do that. Right? Anybody can go and talk to somebody and pair that together with something that they know and come up with like the next layer of why.
I like that.
Yeah. I want to touch on something. I really like this principle of making sure you have a specific goal in mind as you go into research and synthesis. And I think a lot of times designers in particular, not necessarily researchers, but designers will just do research just to kind of go through the motions and say they've done research, right? But you have to pair the research methods, whatever you use, with the synthesis, because that gets you to the actionable insights that, like you were talking about, you go and then apply to your designs. So there has to be a marriage between the two. And I think in my experience, I see too many designers just doing the methods and then not really caring about the synthesis and not taking it very seriously. So I think you can be really efficient and really focused on a specific goal in synthesis, and not have it drag out for a really long time. But you still need to do it. It's really important in the research process. Otherwise, you might as well just not even do the methods. There needs to be marriage.
Yeah, I do believe, this is my maybe controversial statement. I do believe there is value in engaging with customers in a regular way with no clear agenda, with just to get to know them, like just to build empathy, that thing that we talk about all the time. Like, oh, we are designers, we are so empathetic, but you cannot be empathetic without like that firsthand experience, right? You can't be empathetic without that observation and watching people engage with your product in like a very organic way, or just understanding what it even means to them and to doing their work.
I cannot believe you would say something that controversial, Lindsey. I'm just kidding. Wholeheartedly agree. Like it's so illuminating to do that. And like you said, I think we're hitting on different types of research, right? Like there's the big strategic, what should the company do next research? There's the very tactical, like, will my design work research? And I think what you just pointed out is kind of this area that's more just like like this continuous discovery. I shouldn't use that because that's like a book title, but like this idea of just constantly feeding yourself with new experiences and information, right? And I don't think you're out to solve a specific problem necessarily. You're just there to learn and observe and figure out like what's going through people's heads. So I think that's totally valid.
But it pays back in that kind of second arm of synthesis, right? Like in that, like the first arm is kind of like, what am I hearing, like as pertains to the problem I'm trying to solve? Like, what am I hearing as pertains to the question that I have? And then that second piece is like, what do I know? Like, what's kind of my, cosmic global knowledge of this space? Like, what are these other inputs, the things that allow our intuition to exist, right? Like the things that your brain is like processing offline. I think that's where that unstructured conversation plays in.
So maybe to loop that back in, one way you can speed yourself up is having like that constant contact, right? Because then you're not having to go like shatter all your mental models and go figure out who these people are and what they want, because you've probably been talking to them all along. And now your research is like this very specific kind of directional research. And you have to synthesize so much less because all of that is kind of already in your schema for synthesizing. So I think that's totally valid. And I wanted to circle back when you were talking about like what kind of designers are listening, right? Are you a solo designer on a team, or maybe you're the only designer on a project? If you are in any of those situations, I always recommend like synthesizing with a buddy. And if you can, especially someone who's been able to sit in on the sessions or consume as much of the research as they can. This probably takes the form of like a product manager, or maybe there's another designer you did it with. I have also had great success doing this with engineers who especially have a rich history with the product, that know like when we built something and why, and what the hypothesis was for building that, and being able to bounce ideas off of those people and say, what if it was like this? Why are they saying this? Why are these two people's experiences different? And having like this person to bounce these ideas off of like exponentially increases the time to valuable insights. So it doesn't just have to be like you alone in a room with a bunch of sticky notes. It's like driving yourself mad.
Be. Yeah. And like another like controversial statement, like you don't have to use sticky notes. Like it's still synthesis, even if you don't. So I'm just you can quote me on that.
Yeah. Speaking of partnering with people and sticky notes, what do you guys think of workshops? Because I'm not a big fan of meetings, but I find that if workshops are done correctly, they can help you. They are actually an efficient use of time. Like that, you can plow through tons of stuff with partners and really get a lot of synthesis out of it. But I'm curious what your guys' experience has been with that.
Yeah, so something I was thinking about as Taylor was mentioning the value of bringing others in, like to your synthesis and having those conversations and just saying, this is what I'm hearing. And what do you think about, have you heard these things, or what is your perspective? And then you had mentioned, Jordan, like earlier, going through the methods, but not doing anything with it. So it got me sort of thinking about this like tendency for people who are going through this for the first time, or like very new, and they're just like, okay, I need to do research. I know we need to do it. And then you get the readouts that are like, well, 6 people said this and 8 people said this. So we're going to go with what 8 people said. Right. Like, you really are trying to get like beyond what people say with synthesis, right? Like you're trying to get to the motivation behind what they're saying, which is a much more compelling story. And I think that like as a practice, when you bring people in, whether it's like a workshop setting or just like hey, like swivel my chair around, or I guess ping me on Zoom, and like let's have a conversation about it, is like I think the first natural question, if you say like, well, 6 people said this, the natural reaction that Taylor would have if I told him that would be like, well, why? Why did 6 people say that, right? And then you get a more interesting conversation, and you have to like reach in and say like, well, why did they say that? Like, what did I observe? What were the things that I observed that they were not saying? What are the things that I've observed in these other interactions that I've had with people that can get me to the why? And I think that that's an easier thing to get to, like with people, whether it's in a structured workshop setting or in a casual conversation.
And I think something important that Lindsey is touching on is I think you kind of need to know the maturity of your co-synthesizers. Like you need to know their data maturity and their research maturity, and know like if they're able to kind of focus in on the right areas, if they're able to interpret that data in an unbiased way, or at least the least biased way humans can interpret data. And to Jordan's point about workshops, I think I found workshops more helpful when I maybe have a less mature audience in that way. Like these are people from other departments who have maybe participated in this some way, because I've pulled them in from marketing or sales or whatever, because they have some sort of interesting experience. And I think the workshop puts like some bumpers or some guide rails onto that synthesis so that I can draw information out of them without entering the very ethereal world of synthesis. And it feels much more like we're kind of accomplishing an activity, and it's a little easier to track than to say, let me open up this world of abstract thought and organizing behavior patterns. So in that way, I think workshops can really tamp that down and focus the interaction.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And also maybe reach a broader audience and people who might interpret data that you collect from interviews in a different way than the people who are like very close to the product and very close to the problem might.
I'm going to totally switch gears here and bring up something else. I think being organized and leveraging tools is really valuable for being efficient. I mean, like one of my favorite tools is Dovetail. I've mentioned it before, but it's like tailor-made for this kind of thing. It's very accurate video transcription, and it has this tagging system that helps you pull out patterns and stuff. And, if you don't have the budget for Dovetail, you can use something like Notion or Airtable. But the point is just to standardize and utilize tools and get organized so that, as you're talking to customers along the way, like we've been talking about, and as you're doing synthesis and workshops or whatever, you can fit it all into the system. And I think getting that in place kind of pays dividends over the long run.
Yep, I very much agree. I've used the much more rudimentary form of Dovetail, which is a Google Doc with a lot of comments in it. Is usually what that turns into, and I wish that it had a lot of the features that Dovetail does. But again, I think that brings us back to planning, right? Because Dovetail is as effective as your tagging system and your organizational system is. And so to tag well and to organize well, you kind of need to know what you're looking for, and you need to know what patterns you're after. But certainly those tools can help you capture those insights more quickly, share them more quickly, and eventually take action on them more quickly. So wholeheartedly agree that that's a solid way to keep yourself moving.
And also help you recall. I think a lot of times when you're in the interview process and you're engaging with a customer, assuming that you're doing some kind of moderated, where you are actually talking to a customer and it's not like an unmoderated test or a survey or something like that. If we're talking about like collecting data in that way, it can be really difficult to engage and also like take notes in the moment, right? So leveraging tools to capture things so you can be fully engaged, ask questions, ask thoughtful questions, and then go back and like review things later. I think that tooling can be really helpful for that.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Lindsey, and that brings us around to what we were talking about before, where it's important to do your research methods and then synthesize so that you can pull out those insights and then go and apply it to your designs. And so being organized, like you said, helps you pull out those insights and recall what you've learned. So I think that's really great. That's a great note to end on, because we're coming up to the end of our time. But this has been a great conversation, Lindsey. I'm sure our listeners learned a lot. So thanks a lot for joining us today. Where can people learn more about you or follow along with your work?
I am really bad at social media. I don't do much of it. they're like, I exist on LinkedIn, Lindsey Whitefield Martin. I have a dog, Zelda, for anyone who's watching this video. She has an Instagram, which is Zelda the Bull Terror. She's adorable. So if you want to come check out my dog, that's where you can find me. Am I allowed to make one statement to designers?
Yes.
Okay.
Please.
So what I want people to know is that synthesis sounds scary. It doesn't have to be. And the first couple of times you do it, you might not do it right, in air quotes. But keep trying, stay curious, ask questions. You'll get there and you'll do great.
That was amazing. Thank you, Lindsey, for the pep talk. What a great way to end. Also, I'm excited for the huge influx of followers that Zelda will get, hopefully. So we highly encourage our audience to follow along. It's been really great having you on the show, Lindsey.
Yeah, good to see you guys.
Yeah, thanks for listening or watching today. We hope you enjoyed it. UX Chats is a podcast from UX Tools. You can find out more about us at uxtools.co.
Be sure to follow or subscribe. And if you found this episode useful, please leave us a rating and review, or simply share the episode with someone you know. That would be a huge help.
We'll see you next time.